Deep Sea Embers Chapter 416 to 420. The core veins of Frost's Mountain, the deepest mines that once thrived with mineral wealth, had been reportedly exhausted many decades ago. Yet, the sustenance on which this city-state so heavily relied seemed to have taken on a twisted form. Nestled far below within the desolate metal mine, a secretive door stood, a relic left by the original city administrators. Disturbingly, the existing city hall and the governor could also be implicated as contributors and preservers of this deeply kept secret. Even the most proficient and disciplined guardians, routinely in the line of exposure to dangerous and peculiar phenomena, were struck mute and awestruck by this revelation. In their shared surprise, they grasped the rationale behind the mission's confidentiality, understanding why the gatekeeper had only disclosed the specifics once they were all safely tucked away within the mine. Such information, even excluding the potential menace posed by any paranormal activities associated with it, could, on its own merit, incite a social uproar within the city-state, especially regarding the truth about the exhaustion of the mines. We can't yet ascertain whether the mining tunnels were truly drained of resources decades ago, and neither can we determine the exact nature of what was transported out of the mine under the supposed conditions of mineral scarcity. What is clear, however, is that if all of this is indeed a product of some sort of contamination, and if the current irregularities within the city-state can be linked to this contamination, then we are currently positioned at the deepest, most concentrated point of this contamination. Agatha's gaze roved over her subordinates, her voice as steady and composed as always. I'm aware that you all know the current situation above ground, and I realize you've had your doubts. You must be questioning why our top-tier team was dispatched to investigate a seemingly insignificant mine at such a pivotal moment. I understand your concerns for our comrades battling the monstrous entities in the fog and the skirmishes in the surrounding seas. However, let's not forget that we are also standing on a battlefield as we speak. Our inquiry into this mine could potentially provide our comrades in other locations with crucial assistance. It might allow us to pinpoint and eradicate the crisis at its root, a more strategic approach compared to the relentless and futile efforts against the monsters lurking within the dense fog. So, does anyone have any questions? Her eyes scanned the room, taking in the familiar sight of her subordinates' composed and determined faces before nodding slightly in approval. All right, let's get moving. Our destination is the deepest level of the mine. Be vigilant in this dark environment, and continuously check the ventilation and lighting system status. Each one of you was given a self-support device upon descent. Now, it's time to put on your masks and activate the external circulation valve. I'm sure you all remember the usage instructions, right? If a crisis arises, switch the valve clockwise for internal circulation, activate the self-rescue device's pin, and retreat swiftly back to the main tunnel, making self-preservation your top priority. Immediately upon instruction, the guardians, priests, and nuns sprang into action. They secured breathing masks over their faces, methodically inspecting the condition of the connecting tubes and the circulation valves. Furthermore, they affixed specially designed underground lanterns onto the clasps of their chest armor to prevent any impediment to their movements. However, Agatha didn't follow suit by wearing a mask. Being the gatekeeper of Bartok, her bodily constitution was vastly distinct from that of an average human, particularly in the aspect of respiration. The typical toxic gases and suffocating environments wouldn't have any significant impact on her. As her subordinates were gearing up to commence their journey, a soft hissing sound stealthily invaded Agatha's auditory senses. At first, Agatha surmised that the hissing originated from the sound of her subordinates inhaling and exhaling through their masks. Yet, soon enough, she discerned that the source of the noise was somewhat distant, beyond the cluster of her team members, rooted in the shadowy regions untouched by the illumination. Be on guard. Agatha's reaction was instantaneous as she vocally warned her crew. Within the next few seconds, several other guardians picked up on the hissing noise, seemingly a valve discharging air, emanating from the obscure depths, and multiple beams of light concurrently veered in that direction. Within the nebulous mix of light and fog, Agatha glimpsed a silhouette gradually taking form from the shadowy recess, an individual clad in a dense black coat, wearing a gas mask, and seemingly bearing firearms. This figure was lying amid an assortment of random objects, breathing heavily, with the hissing noise evidently issuing from his gas mask. Why would there be someone here all of a sudden? The Guardians had thoroughly scanned the entire embarkation point prior to this, and it would have been highly unlikely for them to overlook such a conspicuous presence. Questions began swirling in Agatha's mind, but they didn't deter her immediate action. She swiftly moved towards the seemingly dying figure, her team of guardians tailing closely. This is a city-state soldier. One of the guardians promptly recognized the gear of the fallen individual, a part of the governor's personal guard. Agatha quickly surveyed the soldier, noticing a metallic breastplate layered over his hefty black coat. The power conduit that interconnected his breastplate and armguard was already fractured. An advanced military-grade breathing mask almost entirely obscured his face. It was only from his build that she could infer his gender as male, and the lethal wound was located near his chest. His internal organs were substantially damaged. One of his arms was already shattered, while the other tightly clung to a rifle. Perhaps the sudden influx of light around him triggered some physiological response. After Agatha approached, the masked soldier made a slight movement as if attempting to lift his head. The guardians surrounding her were immediately taken aback, their hands instinctively reaching for their weapons. However, Agatha signaled them with a calm wave of her hand, stepped forward, and slightly stooped down to the level of the fallen man. "Identify yourself," she commanded. "Governor's Guard, Martin, Blythe, Sergeant," came the strained response. "Sergeant Blythe, what brings you here?" Governor Winston, the soldier, who now identified himself as Sergeant Blythe, spoke in a raspy voice. The words uttered beneath his breathing mask were progressively labored. He referred to the governor's name and strenuously attempted to raise his arm, seemingly pointing towards an area. "Mr. Winston entered a secret chamber. We require reinforcement." His voice trailed off, his arm suddenly drooping as if drained of energy, and a final faint hiss echoed from beneath his mask. His life was extinguished, and in the immediate aftermath of his demise, Agatha noted a tainted black sludge slowly seeping from his wound in the area under his mask. His body began a rapid decomposition process, almost appearing as if it was melting, producing an eerie, squishy noise. A doppelganger. The guardians in the vicinity instantaneously reacted, retreating swiftly. Simultaneously, the brave priest accompanying them advanced, sprinkling a pre-mixed concoction of powder on the disintegrating body while casting a pale fireball onto the corpse. With a resonating blast, a pale flame ignited, rapidly enveloping the doppelganger within its grasp. After a swift and intense combustion, all that remained was a mound of dried, motionless black sludge and the lingering warmth in the surrounding air. Agatha observed this sequence of events with composed demeanor. From the moment the figure materialized, she had surmised that he could potentially be a doppelganger born from the dense fog. Now, her gaze pensively wandered towards the direction Sergeant Blythe had indicated just before his expiration. "So, it's this way, huh?" she murmured under her breath. "Gatekeeper, that could merely have been the trickery of a doppelganger." The priest adjacent to her felt compelled to caution her after hearing her mumble, "It might well be a trap laid by the adversary." Yet, it appeared not to realize it was a doppelganger. Agatha mildly shook her head. "Do you recall the intelligence we had gathered earlier? These doppelgangers seem to fall into three categories. One type is oblivious, attacking all living beings indiscriminately. Another appears to be under external control, systematically wreaking havoc within the city. And the third type seems to preserve the original's memories and emotions, without even a hint of awareness that they're fraudulent." The priest looked stunned, his tone wavering. "You're suggesting?" Agatha's expression briefly turned contemplative, but her fleeting moment of indecision went unnoticed by those around. After a brief period of thought, she spoke in her usual calm manner. "This doppelganger was duplicated not long ago. It may possess memories from a few hours or even less prior. On the other hand, when we commenced our descent into the mine, the news from City Hall was always relayed by the secretary. Governor Winston seems to have vanished." The priest quickly grasped Agatha's inference. "So, while the doppelganger is a fabrication, its memories are authentic," he articulated swiftly. "Governor Winston might have indeed ventured here with a contingent of soldiers not long ago, and a sergeant named Martin Blythe may have met his end in these mining tunnels. This thick fog might have replicated the recently deceased sergeant and his memory." "That might indeed be the case." Agatha responded with a gentle nod, then cast her gaze towards the mining tunnel, dimly illuminated by the diffuse light. The mysteries unfolding deep within the mine's layers were unknown to all, yet it was clear that Governor Winston held information others did not. Now, when the entire city was entangled in this phenomenon at this critical stage, he had led a squad of soldiers into this mine. The most substantial lead undoubtedly lay in this direction. "Thank you for the enlightenment." Agatha turned her gaze towards the pile of dried sludge, which bore no resemblance to a human form anymore, and acknowledged it solemnly. Then she beckoned her subordinates, Follow me, we're going to locate the governor. Simultaneously, on the vast expanse of the ocean blanketed by a chaotically dark sky, a spectral double-masted ship was gliding over the waves like a swift gust, deftly maneuvering amidst countless tangible and illusory ship shadows. Lawrence stood at the prow of the White Oak, peering down at the undulating sea beneath him. Amid those heaving waves, he could already glimpse the reflected silhouette of the distant city-state. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. The image of Martha materialized in the small handheld mirror Lawrence always carried. She was surrounded by a swirling abyss of dense black fog, her ethereal voice reaching his ears. Can you perceive the luminescence in the far-off distance? I can, Lawrence affirmed with a nod, craning his neck upwards to take in the sight before him. A colossal expanse of ebony shadows hovered over the sea, their shape bearing a loose resemblance to a metropolis's skyline but lacking any clear, distinguishing details. The water below mirrored the radiant lights from the docks and various structures at the periphery of the city. Their vessel, the White Oak, was steadily advancing towards this bewildering display of light and shadow, with no visible person guiding its course. Numerous ghostly apparitions of ships seemed to float on the distant sea's surface as if caught in the throes of a brutal naval battle. In this tumultuous tableau of light and shadow, reality and illusion, he felt an eerie sense of his own self becoming spectral. Such an inconceivable sight, so this is how the world appears from the perspective within the mirror. In your vision, the light and shadow are inverted, but in my sight, it's a perfectly normal scene. However, this will soon change again, Martha said, a soft smile gently curving her lips. Prepare yourself. We will be docking shortly. The location is a deserted pier at the southernmost edge of the east dock. I will maneuver the ship as close as I can to an entry point for sewer maintenance. Make sure to bring your mirror. I will guide you through to the second waterway. Upon our arrival, the other forged entities will respond, won't they? Lawrence couldn't suppress his anxiety. If we're unable to fend them off, you must retreat with the White Oak and Black Oak first. At the rate we're going, those fabrications certainly won't be able to halt our advance. Martha rolled her eyes. Obviously, I'm not an idiot. My mission is simply to transport you here and buy us some time. I don't intend to obliterate the entirety of the counterfeit naval fleet with just our Phantom twin ships. They're invincible, they can't be fully defeated. With this understanding, Lawrence nodded, then turned to look behind him. Anomaly 077 was crouched on the deck, amusing himself with a rope he'd found somewhere. Occasionally, he would glance upwards at the White Oak's chimney and flagpole, his expression one of profound puzzlement. Do people from your era no longer string up wayward sailors from the mast? The mummy queried, sounding somewhat doubtful. Are you still obsessing over your hangman's knot? Lawrence responded immediately, his tone brusque. Put down that rope, go find the first mate for a cutlass and some ammunition. We're preparing to disembark. I used to just slip on the noose and doze off. Why doesn't it work now? Anomaly 077 continued to grumble, sounding perplexed, then suddenly realized, disembarking? Are you dragging me along again? It seems apt to employ a supernatural anomaly to tackle an eccentric city-state, Lawrence stated in a stern tone. We're set to infiltrate the core of Frost through the second waterway. Don't dawdle and go arm yourself. Caught off guard by the command, Sailor stood frozen for a moment before he promptly rose to his feet. Aye, Captain. The White Oak was slowly encroaching upon the reverse darkness, inching closer to the shimmering lights dancing on the sea's surface. A formidable landing team had assembled on deck, standing resolute behind Lawrence. However, First Mate Gus was conspicuously absent from the gathering because Lawrence had assigned him the task of staying aboard the ship. With a somber air, the seasoned captain gave his orders. An intense battle looms on the horizon. The forged warships lying in wait near the port will react and launch an attack on the White Oak and Black Oak. You need to remain on the ship, guiding our defensive efforts. Prolong the engagement for as long as possible. If the situation turns dire, retreat with Marcia. I understand, Gus responded with a nod, though he couldn't help but cast a worried glance at the sailor, who was trying to familiarize himself with his newly procured weapon behind Lawrence. But, is he genuinely reliable? Lawrence turned to look back, and Anomaly 077 sailor also raised his gaze to meet the old captain's. The mummy had a cutlass fastened at his waist, but he tossed the rifle and ammunition bag he was holding onto a nearby barrel, grumbling, I'm perfectly fine with just the cutlass. I haven't the foggiest idea of how to use this contraption. Suit yourself, if you're confident a cutlass is all you need to navigate the mirrored city's second waterway, Lawrence responded nonchalantly. A person who doesn't know how to operate a firearm could indeed cause more harm than good with one. The sailor pondered for a moment, deciding against the rifle, but approached the weapons crate placed nearby and retrieved another cutlass to strap onto his belt. Lawrence refrained from commenting, merely lowering his gaze to study his own hand as he opened and closed them. Then, with some difficulty while regulating his breath, he attempted to visualize a blazing phantom ship in his mind, recollecting the sensation of being engulfed in flames and the subsequent transformation that ensued. After a moment, he noticed a faint glow of green weaving through the lines on his palm as though small flames were gently flowing along those roots. The deck beneath him started to vibrate subtly as the white oak initiated its braking procedure. The nebulous darkness outside the hull was now within reach, and Marsh's voice echoed from the small mirror fastened to his chest. Attention, we are about to dock. Once we have, I will reverse the images again and dispel the twin projection. You need to disembark from the left and proceed straight ahead. I will guide your path. I'm ready. Lawrence exhaled softly, gradually making his way towards the ship's edge. I'm ready as well, Anomaly 077 declared, trailing closely behind the captain. His hoarse and solemn voice was laced with a palpable sense of excitement and anticipation. Land ahoy. Prepare for combat. The pirates are descending. We're not pirates, Lawrence retorted, glancing back at the mummy. We are honorable sailors. Docking imminent, Marsh's voice resonated almost instantaneously from the mirror. 3, 2, 1, invert. Suddenly, the world around Lawrence seemed to convulse, light and shadow oscillating wildly, reality and illusion switching places. The environment around Lawrence seemed to flicker and waver. Then, in a split second, the reflections in the sea ascended, and the darkness confronting him receded as though he had passed through an unseen mirror in an instant. The frost-bitten docks and piers surfaced before him, and the damp, chilly sensations that clung to him as if he were drenched in seawater evaporated instantly. The following second, he spotted a shadow taking form on the sea's surface adjacent to the white oak, the silhouette of the black oak emerging from the shadow rapidly. Following the inversion of light and shadow, the black oak simultaneously discarded its mirrored state along with the white oak, appearing on the sea surface as a twin ship ready to battle alongside its counterpart. Columns of light pierced the sky from the dock instantaneously, sirens blared from distant streets and alleys, frenzied gusts of wind whirled in the port, and the thunderous sounds of ship cannons reverberated from afar, creating an atmosphere of tumultuous chaos. Had the reaction been this instantaneous? A surge of surprise flashed through Lawrence's mind, but he responded rapidly. He thrust the rope ladder down and was the first to charge forth. Advance. The landing party, a contingent of a dozen or so proficient sailors, surged onto the dock and adhered to the path marked out by Martha, moving towards a distant junction. As was only fitting, Lawrence spearheaded the group. The biting wind howled in his ears, and the distant sirens and gunfire echoed with a distorted, sporadic rhythm. Beneath the tumultuous, dim-lit sky, Lawrence sprinted fervently through this ghostly city distorted by mirrors, a revolver clutched in one hand and a sword in the other. Martha's voice continued to guide him. Turn left at the upcoming intersection, circumvent the guard post, press forward, take the alley to the right, the entrance lies at the end. Behind him was the chaotic cadence of the sailor's hasty footsteps. In his hands, reliable armaments. In his ears, the seamless voice of his beloved. As Lawrence ran, his speed increased as if the fatigue and exhaustion amassed over decades had evaporated from his body. He could feel his heart pounding with the vivacity of his youth, blood pulsating through his veins with the vigor of his prime years. He had returned to his glorious heydays. He strode forward, swinging his arms, and a ghostly green flame flickered into existence behind him. As he moved, green flames began to adorn each sailor around and behind him, casting spectral illusions onto their tangible bodies. Anomaly 77's voice heightened into a cry, Captain. I'm terrified. Stay with the team if you're scared. Lawrence retorted, grinning widely, his voice brimming with an indescribable sense of delight. This city can't hold us back. As Anomaly 077 sprinted alongside Lawrence, he continued to cry out, What frightens me is you all. Well, then you'd better adjust, because neither I nor you are retiring anytime soon. Lawrence retorted boisterously, perhaps even joyfully, unperturbed by the fact that his loud voice might expose their location or that his gleeful run through the streets might attract the city's guards. Because, from the very outset, this mission was never about infiltration or stealth, their presence was detected the instant they set foot in the Mirror City. "The streets are becoming increasingly foggy," he shouted, observing the intensifying mist. "Martha, is this normal? The fog signals a threshold. Continue moving forward and ignore the fog leaking in from the real world. The destination is just ahead." "Understood," Lawrence responded with robust enthusiasm, directing the sailors towards the encroaching whiteness. As they ventured deeper into the mist, a multitude of grotesque figures began to rise. They possessed distorted bodies and an irregular number of eyes. They roared and mumbled incoherently within their veil, staggering forward ominously. Lawrence prepared to raise his gun, but before he and the sailors could even pull the trigger, a flurry of rapid gunfire echoed from the other end. Suddenly, a mechanical behemoth resembling a gargantuan spider emerged from the white cloak, and city soldiers, armed to the teeth, hastily constructed a line around the towering creature. The rifles in their hands and the formidable gun turret mounted on top of the mechanical beast spat out incandescent flames, immediately ripping the advancing monsters to pieces. Lawrence sprinted past the periphery of this sudden combat zone, gazing in astonishment at the newly materialized city defenders. However, just as quickly as they had appeared, the soldiers and the mechanized behemoth vanished back into the dense whiteness, leaving only a pile of chaotic rubble in their wake. "We've arrived, this is the sewer entrance. Follow it till the end, and you'll find an elevator that leads straight to the second waterway." The cacophony of gunfire echoed ominously, reverberating off the deserted structures around. A massive mechanical arachnid, powered by a labyrinth of steam gears, pivoted on its colossal form, its 6 menacing machine guns whirling menacingly. They belched out fiery streams of death, reminiscent of a merciless harvester, relentlessly mowing down the abhorrent creatures that seemed to materialize endlessly from the enveloping fog. Occasionally, stray bullets would whiz out of the dense veil, striking the spider walker's thick armor and the strategically placed sandbag barricades. Among these monstrous adversaries were grotesque parodies of soldiers, their forms encased in heavy armament, and even horrendous mechanical spiders oozing a viscous black sludge. As the gruesome battle raged on, these terrifying foes multiplied in number, adding to the formidable resistance. "These accursed abominations are duplicating us," an irate soldier roared from behind the safety of the barricade, his breath ragged through the filter of his mask. His metal armor bore the marks of countless engagements, and the power conduits snaking through his armor joints had sustained damage. From the damaged valves, steam hissed out ominously. Emblazoned on his steam backpack was the insignia of Frost's elite guard unit, a mark of his mettle and valor. "They're not merely mimicking us," retorted the squad commander, his voice strangled and grave behind the confines of his breathing mask. The street was rapidly filling with a dense haze. To shield themselves from any potential toxic vapors, all combatants had donned the intimidating respiratory protection. Every abomination that materializes from the fog is a threat, every single one. Over at the intersection ahead, I spotted a group of individuals sprinting past. Another soldier bellowed suddenly. They appeared to be armed civilians, or perhaps sailors from a vessel. I saw it as well. Their images were blurred, they were ablaze, but the flames were an eerie green. At this, the squad commander jerked his head up but was caught off guard by a sudden, otherworldly howl emanating from the fog's depths, followed by the chilling sound of imminent demise. A grenade ripped through the foggy obscurity, navigated the tiny gap in the barricades, and detonated right underneath the mechanical spider walker. With no time to react, the deadly explosion let loose a shower of lethal shrapnel. The thin metal chest plate stood no chance against the close-range onslaught, the blast wave sending the commander and his soldiers sprawling in all directions. After what seemed like an eternity, the commander regained a sliver of consciousness amidst the disorientation. In his peripheral vision, he witnessed the steam walker wavering precariously before collapsing, its armor shredded as power conduits ejected clouds of white steam, and its remaining turret spewed a final barrage before it toppled. From the fog, an incalculable number of nebulous forms surged forth, seizing the opportunity to advance towards the next intersection. The squad commander painstakingly maneuvered his body, his hand gripping a primed hand grenade with a determination born of desperation. The exact moment when he had pulled the pin was a blur in his memory. Perhaps it had been during the violent blast that had sent him sprawling, or perhaps it had been an instinctive action as unconsciousness claimed him. He felt as if he had depleted every ounce of his strength, attempting to lob the hand grenade into the dense veil. However, in his weakened state, he merely managed to release his grip, allowing the iron-gray cylindrical device to tumble clumsily onto the street. Smoke trailed ominously from the hissing fuse as it rolled into a desiccated gutter, vanishing into the shadowy recesses, slipping into a fissure, skidding down a sloped air vent, and finally plummeting into Frost's deteriorated subterranean realm. In that forsaken darkness, it detonated with a resounding boom. Bang! A distant rumble reverberated from far above, causing the tunnel's ceiling to quiver slightly, showering the occupants below with a light dusting of debris and grit. The individual known as Sailor instantly recoiled, his withered features etched with palpable unease. Are we certain this place isn't going to crumble down on us? It has remained intact for decades, Lawrence responded nonchalantly, advancing ahead. The subdued glow from the gas lamps set into the corridor walls barely lit their way. For a mummy, you're surprisingly faint-hearted. Shouldn't it be you, as an anomaly, who instills terror in others? I believe, the mere concept of excavating such an enormous subterranean expanse beneath the city-state is terrifying in itself. Anomaly 077 countered nervously. What were you thinking? Lawrence shrugged dismissively. How should I know? I wasn't the one who dug it. Unfazed by the mummy's apprehensions, he glanced down at the small mirror affixed to his chest. Martha, how's the situation on your end? Pretty chaotic. Martha's voice resonated from the mirror, interlaced with distant sounds of explosions and cannon fire. Since your entry into the second waterway, the entire mirror world has spiraled into madness. All the vessels within and outside the harbor have opened fire on me. Are you holding up okay? I'm not so easily dispatched, but the unfortunate news is that our adversaries aren't either. They're perpetually reappearing from their reflections. Lawrence lapsed into momentary silence, gazing pensively at the darkened corridor extending before them. How much further until we reach the deepest section? He asked. It's quite a ways off, but there's a shortcut you can take. Lawrence arched an eyebrow. Shortcut? Do you see those puddles on the ground? Locate a road sign, then find the nearest puddle to it, and inspect the reflection within it. Baffled yet intrigued, Lawrence complied with Martha's instructions and approached a puddle fitting the description. He stooped to scrutinize the mirroring surface. The reflection in the puddle presented an image of a crossroad, accompanied by a plaque mounted on the wall at the intersection. He could barely decipher the inscription, "Main drainage pipe of the upper city district." His eyes widened in bewilderment as he glanced up at the wall beside him. The words etched into the aged and rusted plaque read, "Drainage of the Harbor District." Martha's voice reverberated from the mirror. Do you see it? The mirror world is discontinuous. Incredible, it's like to a dream, Lawrence murmured, peering once again into the puddle. Despite his extensive experience as a captain navigating the boundless sea, he had to acknowledge that everything within this mirrored city defied his understanding. However, he swiftly regained his composure. So, how do we exploit these shortcuts? You're already at your destination, Martha retorted, a note of amusement in her voice. Once you've lingered in front of this mirror long enough, you've arrived. Lawrence jerked in surprise and swiftly looked up. Before his gaze was an intersection. A flickering gas lamp was recessed into the corridor wall, and on the closest plaque, the weather-worn inscription was barely discernible, "Main drainage pipe of the upper city district." Anomaly 077 gaped in disbelief at their abrupt change in surroundings. His gaze darted between the roadside plaque and the reflection in the puddle. After a prolonged silence, he stammered out, "Is such a thing even feasible?" The assembled sailors pivoted their gaze to the dumbfounded mummy, making looks of, "Are you serious?" However, Lawrence remained unaffected by Sailor's reaction. Instead, he contemplated the dimly lit corridor stretching ahead. After a moment, he turned to Martha with a puzzled expression. "We've already made it to the second waterway, but where's the backup you spoke of? Where are the Queen's guards who are supposed to be engaged in the second waterway?" From the mirror, the remote sound of cannon fire could be discerned. Martha's voice reached Lawrence a few seconds later. "Take the left fork, follow the red signs all the way. When the path ends, halt and wait, they will show up. When the hour arrives, they will materialize." Lawrence's brow furrowed. Hour. The Queen's guards strike at midnight, each and every midnight. They remain invisible until then. In the hidden chamber where the Golden Flute Tavern's underground communication hub was housed, Old Ghost abruptly awoke. "What time is it?" The old man's gaze seemed slightly unfocused, as if he was roused from a dream. However, in the dimly lit room, the only response he received was the sporadic beep sound emitted from the monitoring equipment and the faint echoes of distant gunfire. In the next moment, Old Ghost's eyes sprung wide open. The faint echo of gunfire. Gunfire. The old man's senses were jolted into wakefulness. The gunfire sounded muffled and distorted as if muted by thick walls, multiple floors, and the passage of several decades. He quickly extricated himself from the bed and reached for an object on the bedside table. It was a large wrench that he kept close even in his slumber, his tool and his weapon. The battle has commenced. The battle has commenced. I can't be idling here, it's time to muster. Old Ghost muttered, shuffling into his shoes before snatching up his coat from the chair beside him. Then, he glanced around the room he had just been occupying. This was the concealed room designated for communication with the Mist Fleet. Nemo had arranged for him to rest here while he monitored the equipment. But in the next moment, Old Ghost appeared to have forgotten everything related to this room again. His gaze grew unfocused once more, and he surveyed the door at a distance with a perplexed expression. Oh, the door is over there. Old Ghost exclaimed with a sudden realization. Wearing a pleased expression, he briskly crossed the room and swung open the iron door leading to the underground passage. Opposite the door, a narrow, chilly corridor unfurled. The lighting in the passage flickered intermittently, underscored by the sibilant sound of insufficient gas supply to the pipeline. The gas pipeline seems to be malfunctioning. Is the pressure inadequate? No, there's no time to fret over these. Old Ghost observed the lights in the corridor and murmured to himself. He stepped forward but seemed to recall something and turned back to look at the secret room he had just exited. The room was vacant. Everyone might have congregated in the tavern upstairs. Crow, I'm heading out, you stay put. Old Ghost called out to the empty room, then spun around and began to shuffle towards the dimly lit tunnel with his trusty large wrench in hand. His destination was the second waterway. The hour for the Queen's guards to launch their counterattack was upon them. In the underbelly of the second waterway, an ethereal fog had covertly seeped into every crevice, filling the vast, underground landscape. This vaporous, chaotic mass hugged tightly to the arc of the sewer tunnel ceiling, draping it like an otherworldly veil. In its enigmatic form, the vapor conjured the illusion of a robust, impenetrable ceiling morphing into a spectral semblance of a sky. Down the heart of this ominous and oddly tranquil corridor, a small figure embarked on his journey. He was an elderly man, wrapped in a coat from another era, purposefully traversing the damp, echoing pathway. Time had etched deep lines onto his face and slowed his stride to a measured pace, no longer the springy steps of his youth. But today, he felt an unexpected surge of vigor coursing through his veins as if the years had rolled back and restored his youthful energy. His usual companions of chronic joint aches and muscular fatigue were conspicuously absent. His steps quickened in rhythm with his heart. The heavy wrench he held was unusually light in his grip. With the knowledge and dexterity that came from decades of familiarity, he navigated through the labyrinthine network of dank passages and intersections, firmly set towards a destination that was unclear yet hauntingly familiar. The main assembly awaited him, and the ticking clock was relentless. However, an unforeseen obstacle emerged. A chaotic mound of crumbled stone and rubble had fallen, obstructing his path. Blocked. Is it blocked? The old man halted, studying the pile of debris with a mixture of confusion and curiosity. His mind raced to piece together fractured memories as glimpses of the past flickered in his mind. He remembered now. The guards set off the explosives during their retreat through the connected well, aiming to slow down the insurgent forces attempting to infiltrate the sewer system. Yet, there was something out of place. This wreckage was more than just a delay tactic against the rebels. Many years ago, a young soldier had triggered the explosives, and the resulting collapse had buried something else. Standing motionless before the debris blockade, the old man's expression hardened, his brows furrowing as he prodded the pile of rocks with his wrench, uttering words that were lost in the echoing tunnel. This path was supposed to be clear. It was critical for his journey to the assembly point. But now it was blocked, and his humble wrench was powerless against a mountain of wreckage. Suddenly, a phantasmal fog erupted, filling his field of vision. The old man, momentarily distracted by the rubble, looked up, his confusion deepening, and he instinctively retreated a few steps. His eyes grew wide as fog tendrils seeped out from the cracks in the rubble, steadily consuming the entire tunnel and clouding his vision. Eerie echoes and metallic clangs reverberated from within the swirling mist, accentuated by a deep voice that seemed to boom, "Is this justice?" Yet, no figure emerged from the thickening mist. The only visible object amidst the expanding fog was the barrier of rubble, which had now inexplicably dissipated. The once impassable tunnel was now accessible. The aging gas lamp attached to the wall cast a feeble, flickering light, throwing ghostly shadows that danced across the walls of the tunnel. It revealed thick layers of desiccated black mud, untouched and undisturbed for what seemed like an eternity, silently claiming ownership over the arid drainage channel that had once seen better days. The path is open, indeed, it's a relief that the path is open. A tide of confusion swirled through the old man as he struggled to make sense of the abrupt disappearance of the rubble blockade. However, the whirlpool of his thoughts soon swallowed this puzzle. Then, with an air of unwavering determination, he pressed forward, stepping into the dimly illuminated corridor. Suddenly, Agatha's eyes darted upwards, prompting the trailing procession of guardians, priests, and nuns to halt abruptly in their tracks. A collective intake of breath echoed among them, their bodies stiffening as they prepared themselves for a disturbance in the enveloping fog. Did anyone else discern the echo of footsteps? Agatha broke the prevailing silence, her voice resonating in the eerie calmness that followed, footsteps that are distinct from our own. Yes, a nun in their group softly affirmed, her slight nod adding weight to her confirmation. A few moments ago, faint but strangely close, almost as if they were mimicking our own. Agatha interrupted, her words heavy with grave undertones as her eyes meticulously scanned the surrounding mine tunnel. They found themselves engulfed within the open maw of the metal ore mine, navigating the path Sergeant Blythe laid out. Their journey thus far had been unambiguous, the route deeper into the mine tainted by the ever-present spectral fog. The mine's lighting system clung to life defiantly. Its weak glow unveiled the mine's skeletal support structure and the rail tracks under their feet. Yet, amidst the trembling shadows, an oddity caught her eye. Agatha noticed two support columns on the opposing wall that were eerily identical, their surface textures and patterns of discoloration mirrored each other with uncanny precision. Elsewhere, her attention was captured by intersecting beams that seemed to melt into one another, their connections defying logical explanation. A priest among them, holding a lantern, approached one of these anomalistic structures. After a moment of intense scrutiny, he began to murmur in a hushed voice, "Gatekeeper." "I see it," Agatha interrupted him, her composed demeanor unshaken. "It's clear that the realm harboring the forgery is merging with our reality." "The realm of the forgery?" echoed a guardian, his voice laced with perplexity. Agatha fell momentarily silent, a wave of familiar confusion threatening to overtake her. She rubbed her forehead, muttering under her breath, "Yes, it's plausible that all the forgeries originate from an alternate reality, and the evidence before us suggests that this reality is gradually bleeding into our world. Perhaps, we could think of it as a mirror." Her voice dwindled into silence as if a sudden realization had taken root within her. As she vocalized these inferences, a strange sensation enveloped her, an encompassing coldness akin to being thrown into a corridor laden with frost as if her blood had been robbed of its innate warmth. However, this eerie sensation dissipated as rapidly as it had come. The ghostly feeling of being confined in a desolate, icy passage disappeared. She found herself briefly disoriented, her loyal followers encircling her, the warmth radiating from their lanterns and gas lamps swiftly driving away the lingering chill that had seized her consciousness. "Is it the decay of reality, or is it because we're perilously close?" Agatha mumbled to herself, her voice merely a whisper that her companions failed to catch. A guardian, lifting his lantern high, scrutinized their surroundings when he appeared to spot something. "There's a man collapsed here." Agatha was suddenly snapped back to the reality around her, her facial expression hardening as she quickly moved towards the indicated spot. A soldier, adorned in the distinctive uniform of the City State Guard, was lying lifeless on the mine floor, his existence seemingly extinguished some time ago. His dark combat attire stood out starkly, reinforced with a metallic chest plate, a steam-powered gauntlet, and a steam backpack securely strapped to his back. A sturdy respirator mask clung to his face. Agatha knelt, using her finger to brush off the dried blood concealing the nameplate affixed to the soldier's chest, her gaze resting on the name engraved into the metal for a few heartbeats. "Sergeant Blythe," she shattered the silence, her voice carrying a restrained echo. "The blood is a vibrant scarlet, with no signs of the body decaying or disintegrating," observed the priest standing by her side. "This is undeniably the original." Agatha remained silent, temporarily absorbed in her thoughts. The solemn scene confirmed Agatha's suspicions. Sergeant Blythe lay eternally silent in the mine tunnel while his spectral duplicate had appeared before the church's expeditionary force from the enveloping fog. The apparition was an illusion, but the message it relayed carried a disturbing truth. "Another casualty here." A vanguard guardian lifted his lantern, his voice bouncing against the tunnel walls from some distance away. More fallen comrades began to emerge from the mine's murky depths. With resolute haste, Agatha directed her team forward, uncovering an escalating number of city-state soldiers scattered within the mine, each one a trusted member of the city-state's elite, loyal soldiers under Governor Winston's command. The reasons for their untimely deaths varied. Some bore horrific wounds inflicted by sharp weapons, others had endured crushing trauma from potent blows, while a handful displayed the grim evidence of gunshot injuries. Along with these lifeless bodies, Agatha and her team discovered heaps of dried black mud. If these piles were reshaped into human forms, they would likely surpass the number of deceased guards. This was a dreadful and relentless battle. This group clashed with an enemy who vastly outnumbered them within the mine, succeeding in advancing several hundred meters amidst the pandemonium. Most soldiers exhausted their ammunition, eventually turning to bayonets and steam-powered gauntlets. Agatha scrutinized the surrounding casualties with a discerning gaze, drawing inferences from the residual traces on the bodies and their immediate surroundings, a rising apprehension gnawing at her. The count of fallen soldiers was increasing, and it was clear that Governor Winston's squad was in a precarious situation. This battle probably occurred several hours ago. With so much time having passed, could the governor still be alive? Almost as if in answer to her mounting anxiety, a guardian at the forefront of their group suddenly stopped. "Gatekeeper, the path ends here. The path is blocked," Agatha repeated, her voice laced with a hint of disbelief, quickly rising to verify for herself. As the guardian had announced, they had reached a dead end. The group had arrived at the tunnel's termination, met by a smooth, solid wall. There was no further way forward. Yet, this was a glaring inconsistency. Agatha swiftly turned to survey the path they had just navigated, her gaze landing on the quiet forms of the fallen guards receding into the gloom. Among these bodies, she did not spot Governor Winston. Perhaps Governor Winston redirected his team upon realizing this path led to a dead end, a priest amongst them ventured aloud. There was only one path, Agatha contradicted immediately, shaking her head, and based on the remnants at the scene, I'm inclined to believe that Governor Winston did not have the chance to guide the surviving guards towards an alternative route. But this tunnel is closed off, the priest voiced his confusion, his brows furrowed with concern. Unmoved by his objection, Agatha turned back and methodically approached the sleek, solid wall. After a brief hesitation, she extended her hand towards it, seemingly penetrating the barrier as if it were a mere illusion. Agatha quickly pulled back her hand, her eyes fixed intently on her fingertips. Her face, normally calm and composed, was now tinged with a hint of unease. Unfortunately, the closest nun in their traveling group had already caught sight of this unusual event. Her eyes grew large and incredulous as she blurted out, "Gatekeeper, what just happened with your hand?" A wave of concern furrowed Agatha's brow as she wrestled with this puzzling occurrence. In the midst of this confusion, a guardian, one of their group, cautiously stepped forward. In his hands, he held a battle staff, which he promptly struck against a seemingly ordinary stone wall. The staff clanged against the wall, the metallic sound reverberating throughout the tunnel. Despite the force of the blow, the wall stood firm, unscathed and unmoved. The guardian turned around, throwing a glance of affirmation towards Agatha before he summoned all his courage to reach out and touch the stone wall. Nothing happened. The wall remained as solid and as rigid as it was before. "It's just a wall," the guardian muttered with a frown, "but just a few moments ago." Without uttering a word, Agatha purposefully moved forward, her steps steady and sure. Once again, she extended her hand and laid it on the wall. This time, her hand effortlessly disappeared into the surface. There was no resistance, no obstruction. It felt as though her hand was just grazing through a delicate illusion. "It appears only you can pass through it," the priest who was accompanying them stuttered in shock, watching this strange event unfold. "But, why would such a wall be hidden deep within this mine of metal ores? There's no record of anything like this ever happening before." While the priest voiced his bewilderment, Agatha remained silent, her attention unwavering from the hand that was seemingly phasing through the stone wall. She began to notice the subtle changes that took place only when her fingertips brushed against the rock. For a moment, it seemed as if her finger and the wall were blending together, much like warm butter melting into toast. The color and texture mirrored that of black mud. This was how she was able to penetrate a wall that appeared otherwise invincible. After what felt like an eternity, she finally broke the silence, her voice quiet yet firm. "I can't make sense of why this is happening, but it's evident, the path forward must be tread by me alone." "Gatekeeper." The accompanying priest immediately reacted, speaking out hastily. You plan to go forward alone. Hold on, this is extremely dangerous. There's something deeply unusual about this wall, and it's quite possible. Our city-state is being consumed by the advancing mist, and the grotesque creatures that lurk within it show no mercy. The sinister force controlling them won't wait for us to figure things out, Agatha calmly countered, her voice steady and composed. Governor Winston's squad met their end here, but his body isn't among the deceased. It appears these guards gave their lives in the mine, buying time. My guess is, they were buying time for Governor Winston to breach this wall. The priest was momentarily at a loss for words. After a brief pause, he protested instinctively, but venturing into the unknown all by yourself is incredibly risky. We should at least report this to the cathedral. Time is not on our side, we can't afford to lose another second, Agatha replied, gently shaking her head in denial. As she uttered these words, she once again felt a cold, eerie sensation enveloping her, chilling her to the bone. It was as if her life force was waning, the vibrant energy within her gradually fading away. Though this unsettling sensation was short-lived, it served to strengthen her determination. I'm committed to unraveling the mysteries hidden within this mine. It might be our only hope in the shrinking window of time we have. She stopped abruptly, caught in the whirlpool of her thoughts. She made a conscious effort to regain her composure and steady herself, before fixing her intense gaze on her fellow companions. I will go through this wall. You all know well the power of a gatekeeper, there's no need to worry about me. Each one of you has a role to play. Once I've crossed over, make your way back to the previous intersection. The first and second squads should proceed to the mining area as planned, assessing the condition of the metal ore mine. The third and fourth squads should return to the surface, relay the events here to the cathedral, and then. She paused, seemingly lost in her thoughts, then waved her hand dismissively, that's all. Whatever follows should be decided by Bishop Ivan. The guardians, priests, and nuns exchanged glances, their expressions reflecting their disbelief. They had never seen the gatekeeper in this light before. They were taken aback, yet under Agatha's stern gaze, and with years of rigorous training and discipline under their belts, their instinct was to comply. We understand your instructions, the lead priest nodded solemnly, tracing a triangular emblem on his chest, a symbol of Bartok. But he couldn't resist asking, when should we rendezvous to provide assistance? Number assistance is needed, but rest assured, I will return. No matter what happens, I will certainly come back. The priest stepped back, the slight emphasis on her last, I, going unnoticed. Agatha drew a deep breath and approached the enigmatic wall. Just as she was about to touch it, she whispered in a barely audible voice, as if speaking to some unseen entity, or perhaps to herself. To be honest, I've grown rather fond of this world. Without any sign of hesitation, she stepped forward, her form merging effortlessly with the stone wall, much like a spirit melding into a mirage. A transient ripple emerged on the stone surface as Agatha passed through, yet it vanished so swiftly that it escaped anyone's notice. Agatha was immediately engulfed by a disorienting sensation of darkness, cold, isolation, and a scrambled sense of direction, followed by a sudden numbing of all her senses. This sensory blackout was replaced by a slow, alien process of reawakening. This was the experience she endured as she crossed the threshold of the wall. After what felt like an eternity, she finally opened her eyes, amidst a sea of overwhelming darkness, only to be met with a stark, featureless landscape. The scene before her was one of unending chaos, amorphous, barely discernible clumps of darkness, sluggishly writhing against an even darker backdrop. They resembled a nauseating, viscous fluid or grotesquely crawling, indefinable creatures. Why is it so dark? Didn't I bring a lantern? Such a question sparked in Agatha's mind, and almost as if on cue, a tiny, twinkling spark of light appeared before her eyes. The soft illumination gently lit up the surroundings, revealing an abyss of inky fog with countless shadowy forms squirming and undulating around her in eerie silence. Agatha watched this eerie spectacle in serene contemplation before shifting her gaze downwards. She saw her own body, first her torso, then her limbs, followed by the battle staff that had been her constant companion over countless years. Ah, you've made it here too, Agatha murmured softly, slowly raising the staff in her hand, her gaze lingering on the familiar symbols etched on its surface and her own name, meticulously carved by her own hand when she was first inaugurated as a guardian. Do you also exist as a shadow, like me? She whispered to the staff. The staff, naturally, offered no response to her query. However, in the smothering darkness, the silence was shattered by a sudden noise. Bang! The sound was the deep echo of a gunshot. Agatha's brows knitted instantly, but before she could pivot her gaze to identify the source of the sound, a voice, laden with a hint of anxiety, beat her to it. Who's there? In the boundless dark void, Agatha turned her head, and almost instantly, a glimmer of light flickered in the direction of the voice. A solitary patch of firm ground emerged in the warm glow of an old-fashioned brass lantern. Upon this isolated piece of land, the silhouette of a tree stump could be discerned, beside which sat a middle-aged man clad in a dark blue coat, as still as a statue carved from stone. As Agatha's gaze fell upon him, the sculpture abruptly sprung to life. He jerked his head upwards, his eyes locking with Agatha's, an interplay of surprise and apprehension crossing his weathered face. Who's there? Agatha detected a faint hint of discordance ripple through her mind, but she swiftly brushed it aside. She advanced towards the illuminated patch of ground, and beneath the lantern's soft glow, she was able to discern the man's features clearly. Just as she had anticipated, it was Mr. Winston, the esteemed governor of Frost. It seems you've been occupying this space for quite some time, Governor, Agatha commented in her typically composed tone. Now it appears that we are the only ones left here. Gatekeeper, Miss Agatha. Winston slowly raised his head, his movements reminiscent of a damaged automaton on the brink of dysfunction, his speech listless. However, as seconds ticked by, his expressions and words gradually regained their natural rhythm. You're here too, but how did you find your way here? I walked through a wall, a hidden wall deep within the metal ore mine, Agatha elaborated in her usual calm demeanor, aware that there was no longer any need for oblique language or roundabout phrasing. The guard squad that escorted you was wiped out in the mine. Governor, do their memories still echo within you? The guard squad, yes, the guard squad that was with me. Winston furrowed his brows as if he was just beginning to remember, then his voice adopted a melancholic note. They were all extraordinary men. They gave everything to allow me to activate the Queen's final key, and I. A subtle shift occurred in Agatha's facial expression. The Queen's final key.